At the heart of East Haven, a retired heavyweight boxer returns to a neighborhood on the brink of collapse. When a ruthless gang threatens a barbershop he frequents, he must rally old friends and new allies to protect what matters most. Will the power of unity prevail, or will fear take over? One thing is certain. This is a fight they'll never forget. The East Haven Barbershop sat on the corner of Madison Street, its old red and white pole spinning lazily in the afternoon sun. Inside, the place was alive with the familiar symphony of clippers buzzing, lively chatter, and bursts of laughter. The smell of aftershave mingled with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in the back corner. For Marcus Big M. Harris, this shop wasn't just a place for a trim, it was a sanctuary, a heartbeat of the neighborhood. Sam Carter, the shop's owner, was at his station, a smile tugging at his lips as he expertly worked on a customer's fade. Sam was wiry but energetic, his hands moving with the precision of someone who had been cutting hair for decades. He knew everyone's name, their stories, their dreams, and their troubles. At the back of the shop, Marcus sat in a sturdy leather chair, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he sipped his coffee. His massive frame made the chair look almost comically small, but no one dared to make jokes about Marcus. Though he was known for his calm demeanor, the stories of his past as a heavyweight boxing champion still floated around East Haven. His presence alone was enough to reassure those who came into the shop. The conversation in the shop, as always, was lively. "Man, I'm telling you, Ollie would have danced circles around Tyson," Sam said, his voice rising with conviction as he lined up his client's hair. Ollie had the skill, no doubt, Marcus rumbled from his seat, his voice deep and steady. But Tyson, he had the kind of knockout power that could stop a freight train. The shop erupted in laughter and groans as the debate spiraled into friendly arguments. For the people of East Haven, the barbershop was more than just a place to get a haircut, it was where you came to talk, to argue, to feel like you belonged. That peace was shattered when the bell above the door jingled, and 3 men strode in. The first man through the door was Connor Reese. Tall and wiry with sharp features, he walked with a kind of swagger that announced he was trouble before he even spoke. Behind him were his enforcers, Liam, a broad-shouldered brute with a permanent scowl, and Troy, who lingered by the door with a nervous energy that betrayed his unease. Connor wore a smirk, the kind that made your skin crawl, and a toothpick dangled casually from his lips. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Connor drawled, his tone dripping with mockery as he scanned the room. His eyes landed on Sam, then shifted briefly to Marcus, pausing just long enough to register the man's size before flicking away dismissively. "Nice place you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it." The barbershop fell silent. Sam froze mid-snip, his clippers humming faintly as he turned to face Connor. His smile faltered but didn't disappear. "We don't want any trouble here," Sam said evenly. "If you're looking for a cut, I'd be happy to fit you in. Otherwise." Connor chuckled, interrupting him. "Oh no, I'm not here for a haircut." He leaned on the counter, his grin widening. "See, the neighborhood's been getting rough lately. And a place like this, well, let's just say it could use a little protection." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Sam's jaw tightened, but he kept his hands steady. "We've been fine without protection." Connor's smirk didn't waver. Sure. But you never know. A broken window here, some graffiti there, things can get unpredictable." He slapped a crumpled flyer onto the counter. It was an ad for a bogus security service, complete with a cartoonish logo and a phone number. Sam glanced at the flyer but didn't pick it up. "We're good," he said firmly. "Always have been." Connor's gaze sharpened and his grin turned predatory. "That's a shame," he said softly. "Hate to see a nice place like this fall apart." While Sam and Connor exchanged words, Marcus observed quietly from his chair. His dark eyes tracked every movement, every twitch of Connor's smug face, every nervous glance from Troy near the door. Marcus didn't say a word, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Liam stepped forward, his sneer aimed directly at Marcus. "What's this? Your bodyguard?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or maybe he's just here for the coffee." The insult hung in the air. A few of the younger customers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if they should intervene or stay silent. Marcus set his coffee cup down with deliberate care. "I'm just here to enjoy my day," he said, his deep voice calm but firm. But you're making that real hard. Connor's smile faltered for the briefest moment before he plastered it back on. Oh, we didn't mean to disturb you, he said, his tone mock polite. But I gotta say, big guy, you're not exactly intimidating. You're just big. Liam laughed, and even Troy managed a weak chuckle. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. Respect goes a long way, he said simply. You might want to try it sometime. The room went still. Connor's smile vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He straightened, nodding slightly, as if committing Marcus's words to memory. Well, Connor said, taking a step back toward the door, I think we've made our point. We'll be seeing you around. He motioned for his men to follow. Liam shot Marcus one last glare before turning to leave, but Troy hesitated, his gaze lingering on Marcus with something almost like regret. Then he, too, stepped outside. The bell jingled as the door closed, and the barbershop seemed to exhale collectively. Sam turned to Marcus, his hands trembling slightly as he unplugged the clippers. Thanks for not letting that get out of hand, he said quietly. Marcus shook his head. They'll be back, he said, his voice heavy with certainty. And next time, it won't just be talk. Sam sighed, running a hand over his face. What do we do, Marcus? This shop, it's all I've got. Marcus stood, his full height casting a long shadow across the shop. We stand together, he said simply. They're not taking this place without a fight. Outside, Connor and his crew loitered by their car. That big guy, Troy said hesitantly, he's not just muscle. He's sharp. You saw it in his eyes. Connor scoffed. He's just a washed-up heavyweight. Next time he won't know what hit him. As the gang drove off, Marcus stood by the window, watching their car disappear down the street. His jaw tightened, and his fists clenched at his sides. Trouble was coming, but Marcus had faced worse. This wasn't just about the shop or the neighborhood, it was about showing people like Connor that East Haven wouldn't bow to fear. And Marcus Harris wasn't about to back down. The morning sun rose over East Haven, casting warm light onto the streets, but the barbershop looked far from welcoming. Shards of broken glass littered the sidewalk, glittering like tiny daggers. The front window had been smashed, its jagged edges still clinging to the frame. Across the wall, in harsh red spray paint, was a chilling message: this is just the beginning. Sam stood in the doorway, staring at the damage, his face pale and drawn. A broom hung limply in his hand, but he hadn't made a single move to clean up. The sight of his beloved shop in ruins froze him in place. Sam, came a deep voice from behind. Sam turned to see Marcus walking up the street. His broad frame moved with purpose, and his expression was grim. Marcus stopped a few feet away, taking in the scene with a slow, deliberate sweep of his eyes. His jaw tightened as he approached, carefully stepping over the shards of glass. They didn't waste any time, Marcus said quietly. Sam nodded, his voice thick with anger and fear. They came in the night. I didn't even hear them. Woke up to find this. He gestured helplessly to the damage. Marcus bent down, picking up a piece of shattered glass. This wasn't just about the shop, he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. This was a message. They want you scared, thinking they've already won. Sam sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. It's working, Marcus. I can't run a business like this. What if they come back? They will, Marcus said, standing, and when they do, we'll be ready. That evening, Marcus sat in the dimly lit basement of a local gym, the sounds of grunts and heavy bags being pummeled echoing above him. He leaned against the concrete wall, a phone in his hand, scrolling through his contacts. Each name brought back memories of fights, training sessions, and victories shared with old friends. He stopped on a name, Raymond Iron Ray Lewis. A former MMA fighter, Ray had been known for his brutal grappling skills and quick temper. Marcus hadn't spoken to him in years, but if there was anyone who could handle a fight, it was Ray. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Marcus Harris. Thought you disappeared off the map. Still here, Marcus replied, a hint of a smile in his voice. I need your help, Ray. Got a situation in East Haven. A gang's been pushing their weight around, threatening people. They hit Sam's barbershop last night. Ray was silent for a moment. Sam Carter, the guy who gave us free cuts back in the day. "That's him," Marcus said. "They're not just after the shop. They're trying to control the whole neighborhood. I need someone who knows how to handle themselves, someone who's not afraid to throw down." Ray let out a low chuckle. "You had me at throwdown. Name the time and place." One by one, Marcus made the calls. Elijah Banks, a martial artist with a knack for strategy, agreed without hesitation. Clyde the Tank Morgan, a mechanic and street fighter, said he'd be there with his gloves on. And Jordan Rivera, a nimble boxer known for his quick footwork and sharp wit, promised to bring the speed. The next night, the group gathered at the barbershop. Sam, still visibly shaken, watched as Marcus and his allies filled the small space. Each man carried himself with confidence, their collective presence transforming the shop into something that felt less vulnerable and more like a fortress. Ray cracked his knuckles, his muscular frame filling the room with an intimidating energy. "All right, big guy," he said to Marcus. "What's the plan?" Marcus stepped forward, unrolling a rough sketch of the barbershop and surrounding area he'd drawn on a sheet of paper. "They're going to come back," he began, his voice steady. "Connor doesn't want just the money. He wants control. And when he hears I'll be here alone tomorrow night, he won't be able to resist." "Alone?" Sam interrupted, his voice rising. "Marcus, they smashed the place to pieces last night. You're just going to sit here and wait for them to finish the job." Marcus held up a hand, calming his friend. "I won't be alone. That's where these guys come in." He nodded toward Ray, Elijah, Clyde, and Jordan. "We'll be here, but out of sight. When Connor and his crew show up, we make it clear they picked the wrong fight." Elijah, ever the strategist, leaned over the sketch. "What's the layout like? Where can we hide?" "There's the storage room in the back," Marcus said, pointing to the small room near the rear of the shop. "2 of us can stay there. Another 2 can wait behind the parked cars across the street. Once Connor's inside with his guys, we lock the door. No escape." Clyde grinned, his large hands flexing. "Sounds like a party." Sam, still uneasy, looked at Marcus. "What about the cops? You're going to handle all of this yourselves?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "We'll call them once it starts. But by the time they get here, we'll make sure Connor and his crew are too beaten down to fight back." The next day, the barbershop became a hive of quiet activity. Marcus and his team reinforced the windows with plywood and moved the chairs and tables to create more open space for movement. Sam set up a camera in the corner, its lens trained on the entrance. "Why the camera?" Jordan asked as he taped his wrists. "Evidence," Sam said simply. "If we can show what they're doing, the cops won't have an excuse to ignore it." By late afternoon, the team was in position. Ray and Elijah crouched in the storage room, their muscles coiled and ready. Clyde and Jordan waited outside, hidden behind parked cars with a clear view of the shop. Marcus sat alone inside, his massive frame framed by the dim light of the single working bulb. The bait was set. All they had to do was wait. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stared out the window. The streets were quiet, but his gut told him the storm was coming. At 10:30 p.m., his instincts were proven right. A black SUV rolled up to the curb, its engine rumbling ominously. Connor stepped out first, his smirk more venomous than ever. Liam and Troy followed, along with 7 more men armed with bats, chains, and makeshift weapons. Connor glanced at the shop, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Marcus through the window. He leaned toward Troy and muttered something, then signaled for the others to follow. The bell above the door jingled as Connor stepped inside, his smile widening. "Evening, big guy," he said, his tone mocking. "Heard you were feeling brave." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. "Evening, Connor. You're late." Connor's smirk faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Figured I'd let you enjoy your last quiet night." He motioned to his crew, who fanned out behind him, their weapons glinting in the dim light. Marcus glanced at the door as Troy locked it with a loud click. "I hope you brought enough guys," Marcus said, his voice low. Connor laughed. "Enough? I brought more than enough." Marcus's lips curled into a faint smile. "We'll see." In the silence that followed, the tension grew thick. Connor didn't realize that the real fight was about to begin, and he was already outmatched. The barbershop seemed to shrink as Connor and his crew spread out, their presence filling the room with menace. Connor's smirk didn't fade as he moved closer to Marcus, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Marcus hadn't flinched or shown a hint of fear, and that unshakable calm was unnerving. "Let me guess," Connor said, tapping a crowbar against his palm. "You think you're going to scare us off with your tough guy act? Hate to break it to you, big man, but that size of yours doesn't mean a thing." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his massive arms resting on the armrests as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Size doesn't matter," he said evenly, his voice low and steady. "But experience does." Connor's smirk faltered for just a moment before he laughed, the sound harsh and forced. "Experience? What? You think you're some kind of hero?" He gestured to his crew, who chuckled along, though their laughter sounded nervous. "There's 10 of us, and only one of you." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his calm gaze never leaving Connor. "You sure about that?" Before Connor could respond, the lights in the barbershop flickered once, then dimmed slightly. The soft creak of a door opening at the back of the shop drew everyone's attention. Out stepped Raymond "Iron Ray" Lewis and Elijah Banks, their movements purposeful and silent. Their expressions were unreadable, but the fire in their eyes made it clear they were ready for a fight. From outside, the bell above the door jingled as Clyde the Tank Morgan and Jordan Rivera stepped in, blocking the exit. Clyde cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing ominously in the now quiet shop. Jordan's lips curled into a smirk as he bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, his fists already wrapped and ready. Connor's crew froze, their confidence suddenly shaken. "What the hell is this?" one of them muttered, gripping a chain tighter. Connor turned, his face hardening as he realized he'd walked into a trap. "You think this changes anything?" he snapped, trying to rally his men. "We've still got the numbers." Marcus stood slowly, his towering frame casting a long shadow over Connor. "Numbers don't mean much when you don't know how to use them," he said calmly. Then, his voice dropped to a near growl, last chance to walk away. Connor sneered, masking his unease. "Get him," he barked. Chaos exploded in the shop as Connor's men surged forward, their weapons raised. Marcus moved first, stepping into a swing from a crowbar-wielding thug and catching the man's wrist mid-swing. With a sharp twist, he forced the crowbar from the man's grip and delivered a thunderous punch to his ribs, sending him crumpling to the floor. Ray and Elijah charged in from the back, their coordinated strikes overwhelming 2 attackers who had turned to face them. Ray grappled one man, slamming him into the wall with bone-jarring force, while Elijah used precise kicks and punches to disarm and disable another. Clyde was a force of nature, his sheer strength making him nearly unstoppable. A man swung a bat at him, but Clyde caught it effortlessly, snapping it in half with a loud crack. He tossed the pieces aside and drove a punishing knee into the attacker's stomach, leaving him gasping for air. Meanwhile, Jordan danced around 2 men who tried to corner him, his speed and agility making him impossible to pin down. One swung a chain, but Jordan ducked under it and countered with a lightning-fast jab to the man's jaw. The second attacker lunged with a knife, but Jordan sidestepped, grabbed the man's arm, and twisted it until the knife clattered to the floor. In the center of the chaos, Connor squared off against Marcus, his arrogance giving way to raw anger. He swung wildly with a wrench, but Marcus sidestepped with ease, his movements fluid and controlled. "You're out of your depth," Marcus said, dodging another swing. "You should have stayed out of this neighborhood." Connor snarled and lunged again, but Marcus caught him by the wrist, twisting it until the wrench dropped. With a powerful shove, Marcus sent Connor stumbling into a barber chair, the backrest snapping under the impact. Connor scrambled to his feet, his confidence shattered but his desperation fueling one last attempt. He pulled a switchblade from his pocket, the blade gleaming under the dim lights. "You think you can humiliate me?" Connor spat, his voice shaking. "I'll cut you down." Marcus's expression didn't change. He waited, his stance steady, as Connor lunged with the blade. At the last second, Marcus sidestepped and caught Connor's wrist, twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the floor, and Connor let out a cry of pain. Marcus didn't stop. With one powerful motion, he grabbed Connor by the collar and lifted him off his feet. "You don't own this place," Marcus said, his voice a low growl. "And you never will." He slammed Connor onto the floor, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Connor groaned, clutching his ribs, his fight gone. As the leader fell, the rest of Connor's crew began to falter. Ray and Elijah finished off their opponents, forcing them to the ground and disarming them. Clyde and Jordan moved through the remaining men, who were now scrambling to escape. "Stay down," Clyde roared, his voice booming as he pinned one man to the floor with a heavy hand. Jordan smirked as the last man dropped his chain and raised his hands in surrender. "Smart choice," he said, stepping back to let the man slump against the wall. The shop fell silent except for the groans of Connor's defeated men. Marcus stood in the center of the room, his broad chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Around him, his team stood tall, bruised but victorious. The faint sound of police sirens grew louder, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the broken glass outside. Connor, still on the floor, glared up at Marcus with a mix of hatred and humiliation. "This isn't over," Connor hissed, his voice weak but venomous. Marcus crouched down, his eyes locking onto Connor's. "Oh, it's over," he said firmly. "And when the cops see what we've got on you, you're not coming back." Connor's crew, now disarmed and subdued, didn't resist as the police stormed in. Officers quickly took control, cuffing the gang members and hauling them out one by one. Connor was the last to go, his glare never leaving Marcus as he was dragged outside. As the sirens faded and the shop emptied, Marcus turned to his team. "You all good?" he asked. Ray grinned, wiping blood from his lip. "Never better." Clyde chuckled, cracking his knuckles. "Been a while since I had this much fun." Elijah nodded, his expression calm. "They won't be back." Jordan leaned against the counter, smirking. "If they do, they'll be wishing they hadn't." Marcus looked around the shop, now battered but still standing. "We sent a message tonight," he said. "This neighborhood isn't theirs. It never was." The others nodded, their faces reflecting a shared sense of accomplishment. For the first time in weeks, East Haven felt like it belonged to its people again. The fight was over, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. The barbershop felt eerily quiet once the police cars pulled away, their flashing lights fading into the night. The air was heavy with the scent of sweat and adrenaline, mingling with the faint metallic tang of blood. Marcus stood in the middle of the shop, surveying the damage. Broken chairs and shattered glass littered the floor, and deep scuff marks marred the polished tiles. The place looked like a battlefield, but it was still standing just like the people who had defended it. Sam emerged from the back room, his face pale but his expression resolute. His eyes scanned the room, pausing on each of Marcus's team members, who were tending to bruises and cuts. "You all okay?" Sam asked, his voice shaking slightly but filled with gratitude. Ray leaned against the counter, wiping blood from a small cut above his eye. "We've had worse," he said with a grin. "This was a good warm-up." Clyde chuckled as he adjusted his jacket, his massive frame still radiating energy. "Reminds me of the old days. Except back then we didn't have cops cleaning up after us." Jordan, sitting on a counter with his feet dangling, flashed a quick smile. "Yeah, and we didn't have to deal with punks like Connor thinking they ran the show." Elijah, ever calm, was already tidying up, picking up shattered pieces of glass and tossing them into a trash bag. "The neighborhood needed this," he said quietly. "This wasn't just about the shop. It was about showing them they don't get to dictate how we live." Marcus nodded, his deep voice cutting through the room. "You're right. But it's not just us. The people here, the neighbors, they're the ones who'll keep this place strong. We gave them a start. Now it's their turn." The next morning, Marcus arrived at the barbershop early. He wasn't surprised to see Sam already there, standing in the doorway with his hands on his hips, surveying the damage under the pale morning light. "What now?" Sam muttered, half to himself. Before Marcus could answer, a car pulled up to the curb, followed by another, and then another. People began stepping out, neighbors, customers, even passers-by who had heard what had happened the night before. They carried tools, wood planks, paint cans, and cleaning supplies. Some came empty-handed but brought their energy and willingness to help. Sam called Mr. Delgado, a retired carpenter from down the street. He waved a hammer as he approached. "Heard about what happened. Thought you could use a hand." Behind him, Mrs. Jenkins, a sprightly grandmother known for her fierce determination, balanced a tray of muffins. "You can't rebuild on an empty stomach," she said firmly, setting the tray on the counter. More and more people gathered, their voices filling the air with chatter and laughter as they organized themselves. A group of teenagers began moving the broken chairs outside, while a few men carried in planks to replace the smashed window. Sam turned to Marcus, his eyes wide with disbelief. Did you call them?" Marcus shook his head. "Didn't have to. This place isn't just yours, Sam. It belongs to all of them. They're not about to let it go without a fight." As the hours passed, the shop transformed from a place of destruction to a hub of activity and hope. Mr. Delgado led a team replacing the broken window, muttering instructions in a mix of Spanish and English as he worked. The teenagers, laughing and joking, swept the floor and scrubbed away the graffiti outside. Mrs. Jenkins organized a makeshift snack station, handing out sandwiches and lemonade to the volunteers. Marcus and his team didn't stand idly by. Clyde hauled heavy equipment and helped reinforce the chairs that had been broken during the fight. Jordan climbed a ladder to repaint the shop's sign, adding a little flair with his brushstrokes. Ray and Elijah worked side by side with the community, their presence a steady reassurance that the neighborhood was safe. By mid-afternoon, the barbershop was almost unrecognizable. The broken furniture had been replaced, the walls repainted, and the floor swept clean. The new window sparkled in the sunlight, and the repaired sign above the door read Sam's Barbershop in bold, fresh lettering. Sam stood in the middle of the shop, looking around in awe. His voice was thick with emotion as he turned to Marcus. "I don't even know how to thank you." Marcus smiled faintly. "You don't have to. Just keep this place open. That's thanks enough." As the day turned to evening, the neighbors gathered outside the shop, sharing stories and laughter. Kids ran up and down the sidewalk, their carefree energy a stark contrast to the tension of the previous night. Marcus sat on the stoop, watching the street come alive. Sam joined him, handing over a cold bottle of water. "You think they'll come back?" Sam asked quietly. "They won't," Marcus said firmly. "Connor is going to have enough to deal with behind bars. And even if someone else tries to step up, the neighborhood knows how to stand together now. That's what matters." Sam nodded, his gaze distant as he watched a group of teenagers laughing and joking near the corner. "You're right. This place feels different now, stronger." As the night deepened, the crowd began to disperse, neighbors heading home with promises to stop by again soon. Marcus and his team stayed behind, making sure everything was in order before they left. When the shop was finally quiet, Sam turned to Marcus. "You ever think about sticking around, helping out more permanently?" Marcus chuckled, his voice low and warm. "You've got this, Sam. The neighborhood's got this. But I'll always be around if you need me." Sam smiled, the gratitude in his eyes unspoken but clear. "You're a good man, Marcus. Don't think we'll ever forget what you did here." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "Take care of this place, Sam. It's worth fighting for." As Marcus stepped out into the cool night, he paused for a moment, looking back at the shop. The light from inside spilled out onto the sidewalk, a warm glow that seemed to drive away the shadows of the past few days. The fight was over, but the real victory was in what had been rebuilt, not just a shop, but a community. Marcus walked away, his footsteps steady, knowing that East Haven would stand tall because it was more than just a neighborhood now. It was home. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.